afternoon. Today is budget day, that's no surprise to anyone, c'est le dé budgétaire. Je fais aujourd'hui l'étude du budget 2023. It is a budget that fails people and the planet. It is very focused, but it's focused on things that don't deliver. One would have thought, with the focus across this country of Canadians looking at affordability, looking at challenges, we were hoping to see, as Greens, and I think other parties too, an amnesty on CERB repayments, hitting the lowest income people as CRA goes after people who can't afford to pay back. We were hoping to see the long-promised disability benefits with details about when disability benefit payments would start heading out to Canadians who need them, not in the budget. We were hoping to see new investments in housing. There is no new money, I repeat that, no new money in housing, except for very welcome investments in Indigenous housing, northern, rural, urban, and on reserve. Housing for Indigenous peoples, no other new money on housing, but some rearranged previous money. There is nothing there to help low-income Canadians except a one-time only grocery rebate. 1 week out of the next year, Canadians who desperately need help paying for groceries will see up to, for one family, $437 once in GST repayments. When we were looking to see help for people, what we see is, yes, as promised, dentist visits will be covered, that amount goes up, but there's nothing for pharmacare. We desperately need pharmacare in this country. We're the only country with a universal healthcare system without pharmacare. Looking at climate, all the investments are described as clean energy, clean economy. There are new investments in tax credits towards geothermal, excellent, towards solar, excellent, but towards things that aren't clean, not green, and don't help reduce climate emissions, such as small modular reactors, lots of money for SNC-Lavalin and its friends in SMRs, and new money for fake climate solutions called biofuel, like cutting down our forests to create wood pellets. We're disappointed in the measures that are there and very sad by the measures and the opportunities that were missed, like an excess profit tax, such as what the US was bringing in on the $65 billion profits of the oil and gas sector in Canada alone. There's no excess profit tax there, nor on the big banks, nor on the grocery chains. There is money in new taxes and share dividend charges and so on. About $8.5 billion is in new tax measures on the wealthiest. That's welcome. But we were really disappointed at the lack of imagination, lack of courage in a wide range of measures. The Canada Water Agency, for example, was a Liberal promise 2 elections ago for $1 billion. It comes in at about $120 million over the next 8 years. Anyway, without diving deep into the details, je veux dire seulement que nous sommes déçus avec la paucité des mesures pour aider les familles partout au Canada, particulièrement les familles qui vivent en pauvreté. Nous sommes désolés parce qu'il n'y a pas les fonds aider les peuples qui vivent avec les disabilities. Nous avons les promesses de plusieurs plateformes libérales, mais pas maintenant dans ce budget les fonds qui étaient promis. I'm open to discussing with any questions you may have, mais je veux ajouter qu'il y a aussi nouveaux subventions pour l'énergie fossile. We were shocked to see new subsidies to offshore drilling in our Arctic for oil and gas. We've been promised by this government time and time again, including just moments ago in question period, that oil and gas subsidies would come to an end. Instead, we see new ones. Merci. Thank you.
Qu'est-ce que vous auriez aimé voir dans ce budget?
J'ai hâte pour le moment de voir l'élimination de subventions fossiles pour annuler l'oléoduc Trans Mountain, pour les choses, pour mettre sur pied un vrai programme pour atteindre notre but pour réduire les gaz à effet de serre. Mais dans ce budget, il y a des promesses seulement pour l'énergie et pour l'immigration, pour la décarbonisation de notre électricité, mais nous manquons actuellement les mesures pour le fait.
In terms of the excess profit tax, grocery companies are saying that they're dealing with inflation as well, and so they're just passing this on to consumers. How would you define excess profits, and why is that something that is such a priority to implement here in Canada as has been done in Europe?
Well, we particularly look at the oil and gas sector. The grocery store chains have made the case. I don't think their case would stand up with further scrutiny. I'd like to see further studies before committee about the idea that they have no choice but to have the charges they've had and that this is their actual margin for markup. I don't accept that as accurate, but that needs more study. In the case of the fossil fuel sector, there's no question. $65 billion in profits this year alone from the 10 biggest oil and gas companies in Canada, owned mostly by foreign interests. Their profits have been driven not by shrewd business decisions, but because of war. They are essentially war profiteering by Putin's attack on Ukraine. They're making excess profits, and Canadians ought to have an expectation that our government will set a tax rate that recovers those profits to help Canadians who are suffering from the inflation that was caused by the same war that generated the profits for big oil.
But do you think that that could be politically problematic, particularly in the West?
I think everybody across Canada understands that when any company is making money off the suffering of others, whether in Ukraine or across Canada from higher prices, it's appropriate that the wealthiest corporations owned and held offshore with the dividends that for their investors in another country, we should be getting that money back so that we can take care of those who are most vulnerable and most at risk as we have inflationary trends.
The promise was to have real green energy, clean energy focus to this budget, and you're saying that failed. So tell us why.
The clean energy focus, it depends. If you're prepared to call things that are actually not clean, call them clean. Well, we had a commitment from this government that they would be supporting only green hydrogen. They've thrown in fossil hydrogen with tax benefits. We've worked out the subsidies come to about another $3 billion in subsidies to fossil fuels because they're saying, well, look, if you're deriving your hydrogen from fossil fuels, but you quote-unquote abate them, so let's add another scam on top of the scam. Let's say carbon capture and storage, which doesn't work when applied to a fossil fuel investment, then it becomes a green or a clean investment. So there's a lot of green washing and not a lot of green delivery.
When it comes to the global push towards a clean economy, we've seen massive investments in the United States on this. How does Canada compare in your eyes, and what might it mean moving forward for investments in clean technology?
We're failing to grasp the opportunity we have in front of us to work with the United States for a 100% decarbonized electricity grid. We've put I'm really pleased to see a discussion of our grid on the table, but it won't deliver it because we have individual monopolistic utilities in every province. We have to get them to agree to work together, and when we asked questions about this to Finance Canada, that conversation has not started yet. We absolutely need an electricity grid that connects east-west and north-south that's 100% decarbonized, and that is now in a conversation, but not delivered in this budget. So when you throw in nuclear small modular reactors, so-called, that are unproven, never have been built anywhere in the world, and again, I mentioned SNC-Lavalin in passing in my opening remarks. Every Canadian ought to know why it is that the track is greased to support small modular reactors. Because we know that SNC-Lavalin knows how to grease every track they come into. And SNC-Lavalin is the big private sector pusher of every small modular reactor project we're seeing. So they are not green, they're not clean, and when you take dollars away from renewables in order to put them in untested small modular reactors, you're actually damaging the track to 100% decarbonized electricity. You throw in what's a scam, Canadians can see it a mile away, cut down our forests, turn them into pellets, and call that climate action. I don't think Canadians are going to buy that approach to biofuels is clean or green electricity. And again, we're seeing that with adding fossil fuels to hydrogen, as well as referring to any development of clean electricity with a rebate if you're using fossil fuels, but you've in some way abated them.
What more would you have wanted to see on affordable housing?
Anything. There's nothing new in this budget for affordable housing. I'm going to turn to my colleague Mike Morrice to speak to this.
Advocates were calling for permanent, sustained funding. For example, with the Rapid Housing Initiative, there is no renewal of the Rapid Housing Initiative. There is a mention of the Home Buyers Bill of Rights. That was promised within 1 year after last year's budget. In this year's budget, there's no timeline whatsoever for it. And so while, to give credit, it's important, activists have been calling out for an Indigenous housing strategy for some time. That is an important new investment. Outside of that $4 billion, there are no new housing investments in this entire budget. And there are no new policies to shift the market. Homes should be places for people to live, not commodities for investors to trade. And the federal government could have taken action in this budget, for example, by removing the tax loophole for real estate investment trusts and using those funds to invest in affordable housing. They chose not to do it, and it's a disappointment.
You said back a decade ago that the Green Party was fiscally conservative and you supported balanced budgets. The deficit is $40 billion. Do you think that is justified?
Balanced budgets obviously are something you have to work towards. We've never had anything like a global pandemic. I completely support the government spending that we needed at the time. I agree with the language in this budget that our COVID spending saved lives. Probably 70,000 Canadian lives were saved by quick action, which we took, by the way, unanimously in the House of Commons, every party. And that's clearly going to create deficit. The track that they've drawn in terms of projected trends towards how bringing our budget back to balance is not unreasonable, and I don't think that when we look at the other authorities, Parliamentary Budget Office, large commercial banks, there's much panic about the fiscal guardrails and the direction we're on in terms of our fiscal position. But the deficit that you can never make up is missing the timelines and the one-time only opportunity we have to ensure that our children have a livable world.
So you think it would be fiscally responsible to spend more on social programs on this budget?
Absolutely. Absolutely, because we absolutely must ensure that the economy doesn't stall. We're looking at a shallow recession. Some of what we're looking at can be aided with continued government spending. We need a plan to get back in balance, but we don't want to stall a recovery by overreaction to what are inflationary trends that are not all about normal inflation. The budget fails to mention, for example, that one of the reasons that food prices are going up is the climate crisis. They refer to supply chain gaps. Those supply chain gaps in terms of food involve droughts and natural disasters and the inability to get food prices back down. So we need to be aware of the ways in which the climate crisis impacts our day-to-day lives, and we need to know that Canadians, having lived through pandemic, particularly low-income Canadians, need supports now, and we should mention of supports, complete absence of support for mental health programs. We know we need them, it's desperate, and other than the 1-888 suicide line, which we should all make a note of it, but we don't see the supports we need for mental health, addiction counseling in this budget that we were hoping to see.
Can I offer an example?
Yes.
So in terms of government spending, the Canada Disability Benefit, a guaranteed income for people with disabilities that's been promised for many years, is again not in this budget. Giving a person with a disability money to pay rent and buy groceries is not inflationary spending, and the government can do it if they reallocated funds. For example, an excess profit tax on the grocery store giants.
Would you rather see the excess profit tax as opposed to the grocery rebate?
Well, absolutely. And first of all, you can do both. It doesn't need to be one or the other. We shouldn't have to play that game. Rather, we should be focused. In fact, I asked the grocery store giants if they want to pay an excess profit tax. Of course, they said no. It needs to be on this government. We've already had the report on it. To your earlier question, look at the average profits over the past 10 years. Profits that are above that amount are excess profits. Use those revenues to invest in the programs that, for example, the disability community has been calling out for years. Thanks, guys.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you. I'll see you.